Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the OK Preps Extra Podcast. I'm Patrick Prince, joined as always by high school sports editor Barry Lewis. Here to talk a little preps as we normally do. We're shifting back to our normal taping day of Monday, Barry. So it's Monday afternoon when we're doing this. Barry, you were at Union on Friday, and you saw Union kind of dismantle Jenks 38-3. Is Union really that much better than Jenks?
They are at the moment. Whether they are in November, that's a different story. I think that could be a quite different story. But Jenks is just so many players out right now, or they had so many players out last Friday. They hope to get several of them back and should get several of them back for district play in a couple of weeks. The bye week comes at a great time for them. So, but right now there is that big a difference between the teams. Although give Jenks credit, 38-3 was a little deceptive because Jenks led until there's 4 minutes left, or just under 4 minutes left in the second quarter. They got an early field goal, and that just is a testament to their winning heritage. They really believe they could win the game, even though they were really outmanned. And even late in the third quarter, it was still only 17-3.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then things sort of snowballed, and Jenks just didn't have any offense. They've lost a lot more on offense than defense, and they just couldn't get anything going offensively in the second half. I mean, Jordan Schelling, the running back, who was like third on the depth chart when the season started, he had a really good game. He was their one thing they had going offensively. He had over 200 total yards. He was very impressive. So that's a very promising development for Jenks. But other than that, just couldn't generate any offense against a very good Union defense. And, you look at the fine lines between games that are competitive and games that turn out to be blowouts. And this was sort of similar to Bixby Owasso in the opener, where Owasso dominates most of that game, most of the first half. Then Bixby pulls ahead, but still you feel going into the second half, hey, Owasso's got a chance. Of course, that's before we knew Cole Adams was out for the season.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the first play, Owasso throws a pick six, and then they're without Cole Adams, and everything just snowballs. And Bixby wins by 35. And so Union winds up winning against Jenks by 35. But going into the second half, you thought, well, Jenks is still in this game. And then Jenks on the opening possession of the second half, they're down 14-3. And they have a very impressive drive to start the second half.
Yep.
Then they wind up in one of the unsung plays of the game that is really overlooked. Jenks is rolling. They got first and goal at the 6. And then Devin Robinson, who had an incredible game on defense for Union, he stops Jalen Stanford for a 4-yard loss that just totally rails that drive. And then Jenks has to settle for a short field goal attempt. And then there's a rhythm was thrown off on the kick. It gets blocked. And so instead of making it a one-score game, it just really feels that Union is, from that point on, is on the way to a blowout. So it's just like one or two plays could just, really make a big difference. And we saw that again on Friday night.
Was that a typical game for Shaker Rysick? And
It's been his typical game in the first 3 games. Pretty well, even at Jenks last year. He doesn't come out just throwing the ball all over the place and racking up 400 yards. He runs an offense which has a good, in each case, whether it's Jenks last year or Union this year, which has a good running attack. It's a balanced attack. In the running game, obviously, when you can run, that also opens up some things passing, and he's just very efficient.
Yeah. And I was impressed, Barry, with how he threw on the run.
Yes. Oh, he's got all the tools. And
yeah.
And just realize he's just early in his sophomore year, and he's just going to get better and better.
Yeah, I thought efficient is my first time to see him live, Barry. That's why I'm asking. But yeah, I thought he was very efficient, very poised. Again, for a sophomore, I know he was poised last year as a freshman, but yeah, he was pretty impressive. But to be fair, you know, he was really good at getting the ball in the right hands, and Union's skill guys were pretty impressive.
Oh yes, very much so.
Yeah, they are. I mean,
DJ McKinney, I mean, you know what I feel about him? I mean, all of a sudden, I mean, I launched him last week into our all-world top 10 overall. And he's just every game, he just racks up big yardage. I mean, he is really, he's a move in from Booker T, and he is, I think he was wanting to go to a program which he felt could maximize his talents, and it certainly looks like the case at Union. They are maximizing his talents.
For sure, for sure. Let's drop down to 2A for a second, Barry. Rejoice, almost literally flipping the script from their loss last year to Beggs, where they got blown out. They blew out Beggs on Friday, which I think we all could figure that'd be at least I did, a tight game, and Rejoice blew him off the field. I kind of wondered if you'd put Rejoice number one in your 2A rankings after such an impressive performance, but you left Washington 1 and moved Rejoice to 2.
The thought crossed my mind, and again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when I vaulted Bixby from 3 to 1. It's something which I think is like, that's the first time I've ever taken a team I vaulted Bixby from 3 to 1 and put Jenks from 1 to 3. And that was the first time I think that I've ever dropped a team out of number one, our first time in a long time. I dropped a team from number one after winning a game, but I just thought that the Bixby performance that night just demanded it. Mm-hmm. And so the thought crossed my mind about Rejoice Christian, except the fact that Washington, unlike Jenks, which part of the reason I flipped Bixby and Jenks at that point was not just because Bixby was so impressive, but just because Jenks struggled against Edmond Santa Fe, barely won. They're all banged up. And Union at number 2 was also very impressive. And so Washington still looks very solid. So that's why I feel still strongly about Washington, that I mean, Washington's in good shape right now. I still feel very strongly that they're going to be a state title contender. And so I didn't really feel a need to drop them out of number 1. I think Washington right now, Washington and Rejoice would be a tremendous game.
Yeah. 3 weeks through the season, Barry, any team that's surprising you so far?
Muskogee 3-0. Wow. And very impressive considering they won 2 games last year, didn't win any in a shortened 2020 season. So Travis Hill has really got that program going in the right direction. Big win over Midwest City Carl Albert, the perennial powerhouse, which obviously is not, I mean, Carl Albert's still good, but obviously Carl Albert's probably at this point not where it usually is. Because remember, they lost to Coweta pretty badly earlier in the season. So, but still, very impressive win for Muskogee. Everything seems to be clicking for them. They've got an exciting quarterback, and 3-0, and it'll be interesting to see where they can take that. They look like a team that could go ways in 6A too.
Who's their quarterback, Barry?
Jamarian Ficklin. He's racked up, I think, about 400 total yards against Carl Albert. I profiled him a couple weeks ago. We did that centerpiece on quarterback since Jackson Presley moved, and he was in my all-world preseason top 10. I was looking for the next person to fill that void the next time we do the rankings since Jackson Presley moved to California. And Ficklin was one of the 3 that I had as candidates. And he certainly has lived up to that billing.
Was he there last year?
Yes, he's just a sophomore, just another outstanding sophomore quarterback. And for a Muskogee team last year, being a freshman, and for a Muskogee team that was only 2-8, he stood out, and he's just continued to build on that.
Wow, yeah, good for them. Barry, what do you make of Broken Arrow being 0-3?
Not totally surprising, a little surprising, but when you schedule like any of I'm not going to call them the big four anymore. I got to call them the big five.
Mm-hmm.
The big five, throwing Bixby in there with the traditional big four, they all schedule tough opponents. So if you're down at all, if you are inexperienced at all, the potential is always there to go 0-3. And it's happened before. It happened to Broken Arrow in 2017. A year later, they won a state championship. I think it's happened to all the big four or big five at some point, just because all the games are losable. I thought, though, that Broken Arrow would have one win by now. I didn't expect them to beat Union, but I thought that either the Owasso game or Bentonville game would have gone their way.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously neither did. The Owasso game came down to one play, 2-point conversion at the end, which Owasso came up with the stop.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we talk about the very fine line in football between being on your way to everything's looking good and everything not. That's Broken Arrow. That's TU football in the opposite direction after escaping with that win the other night. But in TU, if Northern Illinois converts that fourth down play at midfield with 2 minutes to go, which it was a very catchable ball, then TU's 0-2, and things are looking things are looking sort of bleak there. Instead, it's TU's 1-1, and everyone's optimistic going into this week's game against Jacksonville State.
Was there really 22,000 there, Barry, as they announced?
At TU, I'd say the crowd was as good as it was for the Battle of the Burbs.
Okay.
In which we put at about that total. So I think that I'm not a great crowd counter. It seemed like my crowd counts at various venues, especially Chapman Stadium, have been off through the years. And although usually I'm overestimating. So, but I think the crowds were comparable to the Owasso Bixby game and as the TU Northern Illinois game was.
I mean, I think that's a pretty good sign if TU can draw north of 20,000 for not a marquee opponent. I mean, I know they were doing some tailgating things, some pregame, things. That's when I saw that figure, I was like, good for them. That's good.
Well, then again, that is also paid, but they have done an amazing things with the stadium and the area and improving the game atmosphere. As someone who's been going there for over 50 years, I really liked the facelift that I saw at the stadium and just the activities they were doing. It definitely livened things up.
Yeah, good deal. All right, so a lot of teams are off this week. Barry, tell us about what you're looking forward to most. Well, you're going to Grove, right?
I'm going to Grove.
Is that your top game of the week?
It is.
Tell us a little about that.
Very interesting game, and we'll. Last year, I'm ready for an exciting down to the wire game. I've seen 4 games this year, and they've all been blowouts. Well, at least in the regular season. The preseason, I saw an overtime game, but I've seen 4 blowouts. Wagner Grove definitely has potential to go down to the wire. It did last year. It went down to the very final play, and what our retired colleague Mike Brown said was one of the most bizarre finishes of all time. He was there that night. Grove conceded the safety on the final play, and that's how they lost the game, because they thought that taking a safety would help them in the tiebreaker procedure to win the district title. But they misread the rule book, and because they thought they'd be better off losing by 2 instead of potentially, like if they would have given up a touchdown overtime, losing by 6. Well, overtime losses in district games, it's 1 point, no matter what the final score is. So they miscalculated the rule book, but in the end, they wound up winning the district anyway. So as Wagner coach Dale Condit said about the game, I was talking with him earlier today, that no one really got what they wanted from last year's game. Because Wagner needed to win by more points than it did. And so they didn't get the district title. Grove didn't keep the undefeated season going and get their first win over Wagner since 2008. So this is sort of like a continuation of last year's game, because you got a lot of the same players. So it's a very intriguing matchup. As Dale Condit said, there are a lot of storylines this week in this game.
Yeah. All right, Barry, we'll leave it there for this week. We appreciate you joining in. You can download us for free at Google, Apple, or Spotify. We appreciate you checking us out. Barry, appreciate the knowledge as always, and we'll check in next Monday.
Sounds good.
All right.